Welcome back to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. On today's episode, I interview Steve Norris. He's the host of a podcast called Better Place Project. Now sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. Before we talk to my very, very interesting guest, I'm sure we're going to love everything he has to say, Steve Norris. I'm going to first tell everybody where they can get the podcast. Pretty much if you're on the audio platforms, anywhere you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeart, Pandora, wherever it is you listen, all I ask is that you subscribe and hit that automatic download button so that you don't have to waste time going back and seeing what the new episodes are. They're automatically going to be there for you. You can listen at your leisure, and it helps with my metrics. If anybody wants to learn more about me personally, go to mattcubbler.com or twodatesandadash.com. Takes you to the same place. If you want to learn more about the book I wrote about my brother Andy called A Brother's Love, a Memoir, wrote that in 2006, about my life growing up with my brother Andy, who was 2.5 years older, learning disabled. He had autism before there was autism. He was a high-functioning, more very acutely aware of sensitivity to things around him, but pretty functioning, high-functioning. But he also had a severe stutter, which was really the most debilitating part of his life. And sadly, he was killed in a car accident in 1989. And the book is basically our life together through my eyes, so people can see him the way I saw him. So if you want to get a copy of the book, you can go there. You can go to Amazon, wherever else online books are sold. You can do it there. YouTube, you can go to Matt Cubbler. That's my YouTube channel. All I ask is that you hit the subscribe and that little bell dingy thingy, so you can get alerts whenever there's a new video like the one we're going to post after we record this. All right. I think that's all of the Matt Cubbler information we need to do. Now we get to talk to my guest, Steve Norris. What's up, buddy?
Matt, it is awesome to be here. How are you doing?
I'm great, man. I'm happy you're here. I know you're out on the West Coast. I appreciate you getting up a little early this morning, and I'm sure you look like an early riser kind of guy. So I don't think I got you.
You know what? It was 4:45 a.m. I was up this morning. Not intentionally. I really wanted to sleep until 6, but I got up, laid in bed for 15 minutes, couldn't get back to sleep. So boom, got up, got a workout in. So I'm good. I've been up for a few hours. So perfect. Life is good.
I am every 2 weeks I switch schedules, so I don't really have a schedule. I get up whenever my body tells me to get up, and typically that's after about 4 or 5 hours. Whatever that looks like in my week, that's kind of when I'm awake. So
now, are you a napper too? Because I couldn't live on 4 or 5 hours unless I got a nap in.
No, I'll say this: since I turned 50, which is a year ago, I have taken more naps. Which when I say more, I mean maybe 5 total in my life.
Really?
But I've never been a napper. I'm kind of just I go until it's quit time, and then in between there's probably 100 ounces of caffeine that flow through this body.
I'm a huge believer in the power of the power nap, and I have been since college. And it's so funny in our culture, a nap is not like a cool thing to do. It's like, oh, you're a wussy, suck it up, get back to work and all that. And then I remember when I was like 22, I think 21, 22, I heard that Winston Churchill, who's one of my idols, would take a nap every day for 15, 20 minutes. And I thought, if, one of the greatest leaders in the, history of mankind can take a nap, by golly, so can I. And I found that if I don't have a nap, generally I like to get 6 or 7 hours of sleep if I'm not going to be able to nap. But if I only get 3 hours, and then at 3, 4 in the afternoon, I can get 15 minutes of just close the eyes and I'm gone for 15 minutes. I'm a new man and revitalized. I'm a big believer in naps. In fact, in my last company, we had an office that literally was for any employee, no questions asked, could go in there, unless, of course, we had a meeting scheduled at that time. They could go in, shut the door. We had a huge beanbag. We had a couch, a chair, and they could lay down and take a 15-minute nap. And because I firmly believe it helps productivity too. I think I would rather somebody work 15 minutes less throughout the day and be sharp when they're working. So I'm a big believer in it. Give it a try, Matt.
Listen, I say whatever works for you, works for you. I know East Coast naps are not necessarily a big thing on the East Coast.
Right?
I'm pretty sure Churchill took naps because he was on the juice from the minute he woke up to the minute he went to bed. So naps were probably,
he was a big Scotch drinker,
Yeah.
so that may have induced some of those naps. Yeah.
And as a Scotch guy, I know what that feels like. And
Sure.
I love a good Scotch.
As do I.
So listen, I know you've listened to the podcast. You've heard the format. I'm sure you've thought about how you're going to answer this question, but everybody gets the same one. So I'm going to ask you, who is Steve Norris?
He's a lot different than he was as recently as a couple of years ago. Way different than I was 5 years ago, and definitely going back to my childhood. I had a wonderful childhood, grew up in a big family of 8 kids, Catholic family. I was the youngest of 5. My parents adopted 3 more. We then had like 20 foster kids throughout my childhood. So by the time I was 10, 11, 12, I was changing diapers. I was, my house, you helped around the house. You were constantly helping with the little kids and that sort of thing. And just had a wonderful childhood, camping and time out in the woods and nature. And I'd been to like 40 something states before I was, 14 years old. And we were just a middle-class family, but we had a little camper trailer and would travel around the country in it every summer. And it was amazing. And I fell in love with music, and I grew up playing piano. I fell in love with soccer. Those were my 2 passions really growing up, were music and soccer. I played all through my childhood. I was the captain of my soccer team. And after once I got into high school, I discovered I'd grown up playing classical music, Beethoven and Mozart and whatnot, Chopin. And I discovered rock and roll, and I realized that the girls don't care if you can play Mozart, but they really like it if you can play the Rolling Stones. So I discovered rock and roll and started playing in bands and really fell in love with music. Started writing songs, and put together bands, played around the St. Louis area. I really wanted to get out to Los Angeles. I managed to, in a band that I was playing with, we did a little 2-month stint in Norway, traveling across, playing all these little places in Norway when I was 21 years old. And that was an amazing experience to have music take me on my first plane ride on the other side of the world, or over to, Scandinavia. And ended up, when I came back, I called my girlfriend at the time from Norway and said, I was a little ready for a change. And I said, when I get back to the States, I'm going to be back in a month. I'm thinking about going to California. Do you want to go? And we had been dating for about a year, and I was 21, she was 20. And she said, yeah, let's do it. I came back to the States. To both of our parents' chagrin, we sold everything we owned, but my guitars and my keyboards and some clothes, and we loaded up my van and we drove to California, and been here ever since. I ended up marrying her, having 3 wonderful kids with her. We were together for 25 years. Unfortunately, we're not still together now, but we're best of friends. We can talk more about that later. And then and then I discovered, once my ex-wife got pregnant, I really didn't want to be on the road. I had signed a record deal with a small label, and we were out doing shows, traveling up and down the coast here in California. And I really didn't want to be on the road. I wanted to be a dad present in my child's life. So I got a real job, and I discovered that I was pretty good at sales, and started doing that. For the first 2 years, I sold Funk and Wagnall business encyclopedias, or their small little 2-volume dictionaries, door to door for 2 years. And the type of sales where you don't sell, you don't eat. It was all straight commission, but I grew to love it. I realized that, and this wasn't selling to homes, it was to businesses. So I would walk into a law office, and I would have attorneys say, we don't want any to get out of here. And I'd say, oh no, I'm just here for a second, and realize that I could stand up to these attorneys. And then I'd go next door to a hair salon, and I'd sell some units at a hair salon, and I'd go next door to an auto body shop. So I learned that I enjoyed communicating with people of all different walks of life. And I just became a student of sales. So I then got, through that job, I walked into a company and selling these dictionaries, and this was a kind of a graphics design / tech company. They sold products to the outdoor graphics and sign industry. And I walk in there and ask for the manager. Oh, the manager is busy, and I could see that the office was right there. So I just kind of walked right over and said, "Hey, how's it going?" Popped in there, and she says, "Oh, no, thanks. There's no solicitors here." And I said, "Oh, I'm not soliciting. I just wanted to stop by and talk to you about some of the things that we have here." And I just walked in and I started selling her, and this woman's looking at me like, "What is going on here? This guy's got balls." And 5 minutes later, I finished my quick little presentation, and she said, "I'll take 2 of those, and I want you to start on Monday." And she offered me a job, and that put me into a completely different industry for the next 12 years. So I was with that company for a few years, and then I went to work for another company in an industry where there was more growth, and I just fell in love with sales. Within a few years, I was running a large sales team in 5 different states, and another couple of years, I was running a division of the company. And then after that, I really wanted more, and I launched an IT tech company, a consulting company. And in 2000, I did that with my brother, and we built that completely from scratch to a multi-million-dollar company over the next 15 years. But while I was about 9 years into that, I would say, I remember being at a meeting in St. Louis, and our clients were mostly Fortune 1000 clients. And I took a team of like 15 of our employees out to dinner that were working there in town at our client site. Took them out to dinner, and they're going around the table talking about what's going on in their particular projects that they're working on. And one by one, as they're telling these stories, they're telling me how they're being treated by the client. They're telling me that, the client who we had done business with for quite a few years, if a competitor was a nickel cheaper, there was no loyalty. It was cutthroat Fortune 1000. It wasn't, whereas before in a working with more smaller to mid-sized companies, it was relationship building. I would get to know my clients, and you develop these trust. And in the large corporate world of the multi-billion-dollar companies doing business with them, it's a completely different animal. And I remember I literally kind of had an out-of-body experience as we're going around the table, where all of a sudden I'm listening, but I was in another place. And in my mind, I'm saying, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? What value am I bringing to the world? And it was just kind of one of those moments that, and in the back of my mind, I'd always thought at some point in time, I want to do something with a little more purpose in life, and I want to give back to the world. And here, everything I had worked so hard for exceeded I was making more money than I ever dreamed of as a musician. To go from there to this life of having my own company with employees all over the United States and overseas, to being completely miserable. And I thought my marriage was doing really well, but unbeknownst to me, my wife was feeling neglected at the time. I thought I was being a good husband by just, being a great provider and providing the big 5-bedroom house with a pool. And I would be home every night for dinner, and I'd have dinner with my wife and kids, and then I'd spend an hour with my wife, but then I was back into my office on the laptop till midnight. And it was just that kind of grind of a life. And just all of that, just over the next few years, just kind of, I started on a mission to do something more meaningful in my life, to get out of there. And then I just had a series of this charmed life that I had up until, I hit, 40 plus. All of a sudden I went through 5 years of just hell. And I don't know if you want to hear about that or not, or if you want to move on, but bottom line is, I went through a ton of challenges throughout that period, where I'm now finally at a place where I can take everything that I've learned over that time and live a life of purpose that I've always wanted. And that's what I'm passionate about.
One of the things that really stands out is, and I asked this question, and it's amazing how in 100, you're now 120, episode number 126, and 126 of these, how differently people answer the question, who is whatever their name is. And each one is in that. And I asked that question because it's a discovery phase. It's a
sure.
Where your brain is at the moment when the question's being answered. Because what I can research about you online doesn't really tell the story of who you believe you are.
Sure.
So hearing your version of who is Steve Norris is important to me. And There's a common theme amongst people that are servant type people that believe that they're here on earth to inspire others, to help others, provide some level of worldly assistance to the world. A lot of them start off in this chasing what they believe is the dream, right? The all-American dream of getting married, having children, starting a business, making money, achieving, tangible business type goals, thinking that is the thing that is going to serve them the best. And without a doubt, the servant heart type person who may also be good at sales and great at communicating, that person always ends up at the spot where you just said you got to in your early 40s. And the context may be different. The thing that caused it may be different, but they always get to that spot where they're like, what the fuck am I doing here? Right?
Exactly. And if I could interject just real quick right there, Matt, that let me point out, I'm still a capitalist at heart. There's nothing wrong with building a company and making, lots of money doing it. And I will not apologize for making lots of money in the future as well. But for me, I just hit a point where making money in the absence of a purpose is an utter complete failure and waste of one's time, in my opinion.
No, I 100% agree. I've been doing that for years.
Yeah, some other people may look at it as, if you can work, without working 70, 80, 100 hours a week and make good money and maybe not like your job, but have so much free time that you're available to travel and do the things you love. That's one thing. And that's another way to live your life that I think is very valid and a reasonable approach to how to live your life. So I just want to point out that those that are out there that are making millions or even billions doing good in the world and helping people or creating a product that solves problems or maybe makes the world safer, that sort of thing. Boom. I'm all for it. Just want to point out that I'm still an entrepreneur at heart for sure.
And I get that. And I think what the point I was from hearing your description of your life up to the age of 40, that there was some blind spots that were in your life.
Yeah.
That
Absolutely.
And I think when people are, my background's in human behavior and understanding personality profiles, and I've been doing that for 30 some years. And one of the common traits of people who are not truly identifying who they are and what their purpose is the fact that they dive themselves into something that they believe fulfills a purpose need that is not necessarily the actual need that needs to be filled. Meaning some people can go to a party, like I'm a naturally not trusting. That's part of my nature. It's part of my personality profile. But I can go to a party and turn it on for 2 hours and look like the most trusting, friendly, outgoing person in the world. But I can only hold that for a certain amount of time. Sure. Before that starts to break down and my true self starts to come out. And I think people that get tied up into, and I did this, and I can appreciate somebody that wants to do both, that has the ability to do both, that can be a servant and help to change the world, but also provide well for their family and live that other part of their life, which is, there's a competitive nature to entrepreneurialism, right? So you're constantly challenging yourself. You're constantly trying to see whether or not you have the chops to stick it out and start something new. And I have 4 patents. I've started plenty of companies and done very, very well. I've just never made a shit ton of money at it. And I tell people I manifest the fuck out of things except money. Yeah. And I know why. I know why, because I'm not an economically driven personality.
Just not motivated by money. And nor have I ever been. Exactly. Even back when I was talking about when I was in sales, never, ever, ever, ever once did I say, I want to make 30 grand this month, or 40 grand. Never. It was all about, I want to be the number one salesperson. I want to make my bosses happy. I want to excel. I want to, so it was really, the money was always a byproduct in my life. But then when it got to the point where I was being so dragged into the minutia of the corporate world, and realizing that where I was spending so much of my time was really sucking life out of me, not rejuvenating me, was when I realized the time, it was the time to move on. And you said something, Matt, that really resonated with me when you talked about being at the party. Or you can go to a party and turn it on and be the most trusting, gregarious, social guy, but your true self eventually, comes out. And I've come to learn that that your true self and happiness are synonymous. They are one and the same. And if we're not tapped into who we really are, ultimately we're not going to be happy ever.
And that self-discovery comes to everyone. It does. And people, they may not recognize it at the time when it's starting to come to them. It may take a while for that either to be forced upon them to be recognized, or self-recognition occurs. Everybody gets to that point at some point in time, whether it's on their deathbed or when they're 18, right? At some point in time, you figure your shit out. Mm-hmm. And who you are, what you want, where your values are, where your energy wants to be spent, how you want people to see you, how you want to present yourself. Like all those things come at some point in time. And what I love about your story is that, I worked 11 years at 110 hours a week, full-time as a cop, plus full-time running 3 gyms and a manufacturing company. And so I know that extended feeling.
Sure.
And that wondering whether or not all that sacrifice that your family's giving of you, like they're allowing me to go do these things. Am I doing it right? And am I doing it for the right reason? And am I accomplishing the things that sacrifice would make worthwhile? Right. So you mentioned that your wife, you thought your marriage was going great. You had 3 kids and married for 25 years. You dated, moved to California with you, and you had that. I mean, absent the little foreshadowing teaser, I'd be like, man, dude's got it by the balls, right? He was a rock star and then came back and moved to California, sold everything he had. It's that classic love story, but apparently that didn't end as well as one might have hoped during the buildup of the climax of that story.
Yeah, well, long story short, I woke up one day and I was knocked upside the head and realized my life wasn't at all what I thought it was. And yeah, there was an affair involved, and she basically left. Had been having an affair for about a month and moved out of the house. I stayed there, and we still had a couple of our kids were still in school. Our oldest had graduated and left. And so literally overnight, what I thought was we hadn't so much as argued about what color to paint the bathroom, so, and that may have been part of the problem, that maybe it wasn't quite as engaged as I should have been. And so, yeah, it really turned my life upside down. Absolutely. And yeah, when that happens, it's, I'm a wine lover, and so is my ex. And when that happened, I thought, all right, I'm not going to touch my wine cabinet for a month. I didn't drink because I didn't know, one parent had left. And so I didn't know if I'd ever stop. I was so just completely devastated, just gut wrenching, like someone had just ripped my heart out, and nothing, mattered at that point. And that also put, the business that I told you about, that had already been unhappy in the business, and now this, happened, and it was, the worst. The first 6 months were the worst, but I dove into writing. I wrote an album about it, and put out another record a few years later, and just purged all that, out, and made sure I still was exercising and staying fit so I could stay there for my kids. And I ended up really on a search for, like I said, doing something with more purpose in my life. And I've been doing a little consulting in the music business, and I still had some contacts in the music business, and I would help people since I'd accumulated some knowledge in business and launching businesses and writing business plans. I'd started doing some consulting in the business world at the time. Well, I still had my tech consulting company, and that led to some introductions where I ended up meeting someone where we actually 3 of us together at one point, and we launched a music distribution company. And that finally I was back in the music business doing something that I loved. We ended up buying one of the partners out very quickly within about a year, and it was just myself and another partner. And for the next 4 or 5 years, we were doing really well. We sold 20% of the company to a firm out of the UK that they did it. So we got a nice cash infusion, allowed us to build our infrastructure, hire some people. And when they went public a few years later, which they were looking to go public, then we would get our big exit and they would buy the remaining shares of our company. And this business partner that I was building this company, I mean, he and I we just became best friends. I mean, we're spending 60, 70, 80 hours a week together for 5 years. He just literally became my brother, who I loved him like a brother. And yeah, just we're building this company and everything was going great. One day I wake up and $600,000 is taken out of our bank accounts and my emails turned off I'm cut out of my emails and he basically flip of a switch tried to take the company. And another example of me being completely blindsided. I hadn't had so much as a disagreement with my partner about, office space or about what coffee to put in the coffee machine. So, and then this, and without dragging it through all the gory details, over $1 million was stolen and he fled the country. And, so then I'm looking at myself going, you are a fucking idiot. How could you not see this? How could you not see with my wife, my ex-wife? I'm looking at that. I was oblivious to what was going on there. I was oblivious. And turns out he had been stealing from the company while I was still there and seeing the reports, but it was in very small quantities. So we'd get reports and we would pay out royalties to artists, and I'd get these reports and I wouldn't see most of this. Or excuse me, I would see all these reports, but then, if it was under $500 or $1,000, I wouldn't go check it out because those are royalties we're sending all over the world. So he wanted me out of the picture so he could start taking more money. So, and that led to 5 years of litigation that quite honestly still isn't over. And it's, still hasn't been resolved. But what I've learned fortunately, what helped me get through that was having to go through what I went with my ex. But the difference between the two is that this may sound weird, but what happened with my business partner was 10 times worse. That betrayal was 10 times worse than what happened with my ex-wife. And you may
interrupt you real quick because
Please.
I want to take a deep dive real quick. So sure. You touched on something. First of all, I will tell you that I went through the exact same thing with a business partner.
Really? I did not know that. I'm sorry.
Not as much, about a quarter of that, but still more money than I could ever imagine. Mm-hmm. The hardest thing is understanding how something could have happened. Just like you said, how could I be such a moron and not seen both of these things? Let me ask you this, because I'm a deconstructing guy. I like to deconstruct.
Sure. Autopsies, baby.
At any point in time, was there like a pang in your gut or a pang in your heart about the situation, whether it's with your wife, that you just ignored? In the lead up to, obviously, you don't go from married 25 years to an affair and leaving on a whim, right? There's a buildup to everything, and clearly there was a buildup, as you're saying, your partner was stealing from you while you were with the company under your nose in smaller increments.
Mhm.
Was there at any point in time some little voice in your head going, wake up, wake up? Like looking back on it, was there a moment where you said, something's not right with my wife? It's just me.
Looking back, absolutely, there were no question about it in both cases. And I just, sometimes, for example, in my wife, we've even talked about this, and she was, like I said, that was easy to forgive because she from the very beginning was extremely remorseful. Extremely. She told our kids, don't you dare blame your dad. He's a great father. This is me. It's, so from the get-go, she made it easier for me to forgive her in that she took some accountability, whereas my business partner went to the company and tried to and lied to the employees and said vicious, malicious things to kind of cover up his tracks. Huge difference there, for me. And but getting back to your question, that yes, I remember, for example, and again, my ex and I have talked about this, and like there'd be an example where she had said that she felt like I wasn't giving her the attention she didn't felt that that I was attracted to her as much, or I didn't show her the attention that I used to when we were younger, and I said, well, honey, you were, wearing grandma pajamas, every night to bed. And she says, well, why didn't you buy me some sexy pajamas? And I was like, whoa, and that also is when I finally, to the point of your question, realized that when the walls came down, when I was able to forgive her, because the first 6 months or a year it was, but she did this and she did, and if she had come to me and, said I was working too hard, if she had closed my laptop and said, Steve, I'm going to leave you if you don't, if we don't fix our marriage, I would have stopped everything. I would have told my company, cancel everything for the next month. And so that was kind of my defense, is like, had you said anything to me, I was oblivious to it. I thought I was just being a good husband, father, blah, blah, blah. But as these things came about and I started realizing that I could have done things differently, for sure, especially in the case of my marriage, that then it's really, really easy to forgive when you're holding yourself accountable for your side of what occurred, for sure. So, and the fact that how it went down, she feels terrible and she's not with that guy anymore. And that happens. And like I said, the good news is we're in each other's lives now as great friends. And I love where our relationship, can be. And I think that's my message to people out there. When you're going through a split, don't be toxic to your ex. Don't be. And I felt fortunate in that a good friend of mine is a family law attorney, and he gave me the greatest advice, at a time when her family and her friends were even saying, cut off her credit cards, go, repossess the car that she has or what have you, and go cut her off and don't, I had my buddy who's a family law attorney, and these guys, their job is usually to eviscerate the opponent. He's telling me, Steve, be kind to her. If she calls you and she needs money, give her some money. You will be so happy 10 years from now, 5 years from now, if you approach it that way. And I did. And I'm so glad that I did, because as much as I wanted to, scream to the hilltop and cut off her credit cards and get revenge, and toxicity it really does kill ourselves. It really does poison ourselves. And taking that approach really, really helped. So again, I encourage people going through a split, be kind to your ex. I don't care what they did. Be kind. You don't know what's going through their mind. You don't know what they've been going through in the relationship from their perspective. There's so many things that you're unaware of. So just be kind. And another great advice that I got was from Warren Buffett, not directly, but I heard him say
Warren,
this
what's
many
up?
years. Yeah. And I heard an interview with him back in the 90s, and someone asked him, what's some of the greatest advice you ever got? And his answer was, you can always tell somebody to go to hell tomorrow. And that advice always served me well. No matter what happens, you're in the heat of the battle at a moment, somebody pisses you off, go take a walk, think about it, sleep on it, get up the next day. And if you still, and believe me, sometimes telling them to go to hell is still warranted the next day, but at least you're doing it from a place of calm and reason and everything else. So
I think it's important, having been a cop for 30 years almost here and been on, I don't know, thousands and thousands and thousands of domestic calls.
I bet. Yeah.
I understand the formula for why marriages fall apart, right? And I think one of the great things that can come from you had a long marriage, and I'm sure there was plenty of love story components to that marriage that are memorable and cherished. You have three beautiful children that you love, both collectively and independently together.
Yep. And
the ability to forgive is not one of my strongest traits, but I do see the nobility of forgiveness as a man, and how typically in domestics or divorces or relationships, the husband side of this is typically the bad guy, regardless of what happened.
Exactly.
So when you know that you are already coming from a place of disadvantage, the best thing you can possibly do for yourself, your children, your ex, the external relationships you have collectively and independently through one another, is to be the better man and to do the things that are going to allow for you to recover quicker and then move forward, which it seems clearly that you were able to do under, oftentimes unreasonable circumstances. And then taking that knowledge and then understanding that in business, the person that stole from me was a childhood friend. And I knew it was happening. I had this, and that's why I asked the question. I knew it. So I listen to my gut, and that's my gut has always been right. I've never been wrong when my gut is telling me what to do and I follow it. This one time I didn't listen, and it resulted in what it resulted in. I can't get into details. We have non-disparaging agreements and nonsense like that. But, it was hurtful for me because I thought I'm a 6'3", 260-pound man with skills at my disposal.
Sure.
I do a lot of damage in multiple ways. And I just assumed that somebody that I've known my whole life, majority of my whole life, A, wouldn't do that, and B, knows what what happens when you do that.
Consequences, yeah.
And it happened anyways. And that what struck me so hard, because I was like, man, the brazenness of it and the lack of caring about my well-being, knowing that I'm not coming from a place of wealth. I'm not coming from a place of any type of advantage. I grew up in projects, single mom, brother died. Now I'm an only child. I've been a civil servant, served my country. I don't have wealth.
Sure.
I have ethics. I have work ethics. I have morals and a code of conduct by which I live my life. So the fact that he would do that with that, knowing that would directly impact my financial stability for my family, was the most difficult part. So when you got done now 2 massive blindsidings, right, in your life, what was the lesson you learned from both of them? Because in retrospect, you said there were warning signs that you didn't pay attention to. What is the greatest lesson you learned from both of these massive blindsidings in your life that caused destruction emotionally and physically and mentally in your life? What did you learn most from them?
Great question. I think it's kind of my answer will be kind of multi-pronged. I think first and foremost, I needed to reflect on how I was living my life, reflect on maybe was I drawing this towards me? Did I really like myself? I discovered that I really didn't, Matt. I really didn't like myself. And if you don't like yourself, it's not easy for others around you to like you. Even though I was still kind, my ex and I, we never raised our voice at each other. We never, nor with my business partner. So I was always kind. But underneath that, I didn't like myself. So I knew I needed to work on myself and garner some self-love and figure out where that was coming from. But I also knew that the inability to forgive would kill me and it would affect the rest of my life. So a couple little tools that I would throw out there that I learned about how to forgive. One of them on my show, we had a guy named Asim Kamisa on the show. And at this point, I had not forgiven my business partner. This was almost a year ago. This is a guy that his son, when he was 20 years old, was in college delivering a pizza, delivered it to the wrong place, to a gang house. And they wanted the pizza without paying. He said, "Sorry, I can't give it to you." And so he walked out, gets in his car. And the gang leader told one of the gang, young kids who was being initiated, go cap him. And he went out, shot him in his car, and murdered him. And Asim, the father, just lost his only son. He reached out to the parent. Actually, that child, the gang member, was caught and was tried as an adult. He was raised by grandparents. He reached out to the grandfather. They became friends. And he started visiting the son in prison. And he said that bullet that fired that night destroyed 2 families and destroyed 2 lives, my son's life and the guy who pulled the bullet. He's also a victim of our society. And to cut to the chase, I'm listening to this story and I'm saying, here's this guy that forgave the kid who murdered his son. And I can't forgive a guy that, stole some money and fled the country. And at the time we thought it was like 600,000. It was over $1 million. It could have been $1 billion. What does it really matter compared to somebody having their kid murdered? So that was a real eye opener for me, that I thought, I need to learn from this man. And if he can forgive the killer of his son, I can forgive anybody and everybody that's ever done me wrong. And I think 2 things that really helped me, Matt. Number one was recognizing that if given the circumstances, that gang member grew up, in this gang, no chance, crack mom, and his brother had been killed, and I don't remember all the details, but chances are, if his son would have been born to the gang member's mom, and that the same thing would have happened. And I think to recognize that in any situation, if if you had grown up in my family and I'd grown up in your family, I probably would be a cop right now. And you know what I mean? And so when you take a step back and you look at the person who did you wrong, and we don't know their battles, we don't know what was instilled in them as parents. You mentioned that you didn't come from much. I would argue you came from everything that's important because your mom taught you morals and ethics and values and all that. Without that, it's nothing. So you are way far richer than your childhood friend who stole that money from you. And I guarantee you, he would love to change places for you, because character is something that you can't just buy. It's instilled in you from a young age and you learn it. Character and ethics and morals, those are something we're taught and they're ingrained in you as we get older. If your parents don't teach you that, and I don't think my business partners' parents did, then, and chances are, I would like to think that if I grew up in his family, that I would not have stolen over $1 million and fled the country because I was greedy, but I probably would have. And the other thing that helped me, and this was just recently, I read a book called You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. And she mentioned something in that book that really resonated with me throughout my journey of forgiveness. And that is to visualize the person that did you wrong as a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, as a toddler, as a baby, and as an innocent, baby, and to visualize that person at that stage in their life. They were innocent. They were just somebody that wanted to be loved and wanted to love. We all come into the world. That's all we want. We want to be fed. We want to feel safe, and we want to feel loved. And that's all your friend wanted when he was a little baby. Somewhere along the line, life experiences, people did him wrong. He got bitter. He got angry. He justified this. This didn't happen to me. Life sucks. I deserve this. The brain starts rationalizing all these things, and that's what happens. So, not saying it's right. I'm never going to justify it, but it can help you on the journey of forgiveness. And it doesn't mean that I'm not still want to hold my business partner accountable. He still needs to be held accountable for what he did, but I'm no longer giving him power over me. It's not keeping me up at night. It's not making me angry when I talk about it anymore. I refuse to let him have that power anymore. And by forgiving, and not only that, what you'll find is when you get to the point and you start thinking of them as a child, and that's when compassion comes in. And forgiveness is almost impossible without compassion. And I mentioned with my ex, she went out of her way to tell the kids, be good for your father, be all these things. And I had compassion for how she was making the best of kind of a horrible situation. And so compassion is so important, and seeing them as that young child can really help, for what it's worth.
I think that's a very unique and poignant perspective. I am, like I said, I'm not the most forgiving human being. I am by nature, a grudge holder.
But see, I would argue that that's affecting your true peace and happiness.
Well, I went through when my brother died, I went through a similar type self-reflection. Well, I went through a 13-year period of depression, which was brutal. But when I came out of that depression in 2002, I realized that I needed to forgive a lot of people that I was holding a lot of space for. So what I've learned to do is I manage it in my heart and in my brain I try to use logic in as many decisions as I have, and try to keep emotions out of certain things, because for me, emotions can cause me to have both good and bad reactions. And it's sometimes, depending on where I'm at, my headspace will determine how I react to that.
Yeah.
So I try to use as much logic in my rationale when I'm forgiving, and creating a level of acceptable understanding within my own logic as to what that forgiveness looks like. So for an example, my business partner stole that money. I've forgiven him because I know that he's suffering every day as a human being because of the choices he's made throughout his life. And that this was just one of many bad decisions he's made that he has to ultimately live and die with. So I don't hold any space for him for what he's done. I don't like him. I don't want to ever see him again. I don't.
And that's okay.
Yeah. Right. And that's where logic
doesn't mean you have to like him or want to be around him.
Right.
Yeah.
So my logical approach to forgiveness is my biological father, who left when I was 1 year old. Throughout my life, he was in and out, in and out, in and out. And when I was 23, I said no more. And I haven't seen him since.
Yeah.
And I forgave him because he was incapable. Logically, I worked through the process of his fathering of 2 children and realized he was just physically and emotionally incapable of being a father. So I can forgive somebody who doesn't know how to do what I'm asking them to do anyways.
Sure.
So logically, it makes sense to forgive him because I can't hold him to a standard that I may have wanted, but he was incapable of providing. So when I forgive under logical context. I'm not that gentleman that you spoke of that can go and forgive because there would be dead bodies. There's no doubt in my mind I know that for a fact. What would my response to that would have been? And then someone would have had to forgive me.
Sure.
That's just how I'm wired. So, but I do agree with the forgiveness for the circumstances that caused the action to happen. I can understand, having been exposed to all of these for the last 30 years, I understand how people become fucked up.
Sure.
I understand the byproduct. I understand that 99% of the world's problems go back to shitty parenting. There's a direct correlation between how you are taken from birth to adulthood that will dictate how you live your life. And some people have a shitty upbringing, no parents, and they succeed. And the question is, at what point in time did their shift happen? When did that person or moment happen in their life that allowed them to change course, self-adjust, and add in all the things that were missing from the first 18 years of their life? It's not the norm. It's an anomaly. And when that happened, when you look at like a Ben Carson raised by a single mom who couldn't read, right? But what he learned was work ethic.
Sure.
What he learned was love. What he learned was someone who was going to be there every single day. What he learned is someone who sacrificed themselves so he could have the things that he needed. Those are the things he learned. He didn't have the traditional upbringing where he learned all of the things that he needed to learn, but he had enough of the basis of a good person in his heart and soul that allowed him to then grow and flourish into this amazing guy who did, separated by, twins in the womb. Like that's just nuts, right?
Yeah, seriously.
So there's a direct correlation between shitty parenting and bad human beings that when they become adults.
Absolutely.
And I think the single greatest gift you probably received was that ability to forgive. And how you come to that term forgiveness and whatever that means to you, so it doesn't hold space in your heart as a callous, is individual, right? Mine is more logical based to where I can let that go because I can rationally understand why something happened. I can't forgive my dad for leaving and being a horrible father, but I can forgive why it happened. So therefore I can let it be. And I think you understanding the hurt that you felt and how to forgive both parties, your ex-wife and your business partner, has allowed you to then release that. And probably, and I'm going to take a shot in the dark here, it has opened up your field of vision so that you can see more things.
No question that the world is in color again.
Yes.
I mean, literally.
That is the greatest. You just said something that, so I wrote this book, A Brother's Love and Memoir, mostly in one night. It's 168 pages. And I wrote 26,000 words in one night.
Holy smokes.
And had it like this. Long story short, my grandmother gave me a gift made out of my brother's clothes that she'd been holding on to for 13 years.
Wow.
And it just hit me. So that night I went down and I cried and I held on to this. It was a quilt. And I wrote like the most vivid memories of my life with my brother all night. And when I came up in the morning, the house we were in at the time, the basement, I had an office downstairs. And when you open the door, the kitchen window is right there, and it's in the east. So the sun's coming up in the morning. It was like 7:30 in the morning when I finally came up from writing all night. And I saw color in the sunlight for the first time that I ever remember seeing it. And this like feeling of peace just sort of washed over me with that sunlight. And it was the most surreal and very clearly memorable moment where I knew things were going to be okay again. So when you have that ability to see color and that ability to have that wider field of view and that understanding of the world around you and where you fit into it, only comes from trauma.
Mm-hmm.
There is no other way to go through that in life. There's no other way, but you have to suffer trauma. And I tell my kids that, they've suffered a lot of trauma. They've lost, my wife's sister died of cancer, and they've lost people close to them at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
And having to understand trauma and death and the fragility of life and how short it can be helps to early on to sculpt who they are and reinforce the stuff that my wife and I teach them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some people I know people that didn't lose a family member or suffer a real life trauma for the first 40 some years of their life.
Yeah, I'm one of them. I've been very, very fortunate. Very little other than elderly parents, grandparents, that sort of thing, but never someone very, very close in the family. Knock on wood. Yeah.
So let's talk about that wider field of view, that color that you're now seeing.
Yeah, once you are cleansed, that's another kind of word I use. Once you're cleansed of that weight you've been carrying on your back, it's almost like you have wind underneath you, at the risk of sounding cliche. It's, I think so many of these things, when it happens, and I talked about the self-love that was lacking, the negative talk that, the more I would start reading about what's going on in your head and learning about neuroplasticity and the power of our thoughts, that I realized no wonder I've been in a rut for, 5-6 years. When I started paying attention to my thoughts, Matt, I couldn't believe it. Hardly 20 minutes would go by that I wouldn't say in my head, just when I'm, you're an idiot. Why did you do that? Why did you say that? You're an idiot. You're and when you really think about it, we treat ourselves so much worse than we ever would treat a good friend of ours. If, no way would I ever say to a friend of mine who did something silly, or maybe at the end of this call, I'll think, man, I wish I had said to Matt, or I should have answered this question differently. I may say, Steve, you idiot, you should have, or I would have a few years ago, you idiot, why did you say this? But I would never say it to my friend who was interviewed by you and say, you're a stupid moron, why'd you do that? But those are thoughts that, and if you have enough of those thoughts week after week, day after day, month after month, you start to believe it. You start to believe that you're a loser. You start to believe in so many of those things that you're trying to accomplish in life. If the underlying, if you're not in line with your, like, to use your expression you used at the top of the interview, to your true self, then you're truly never going to be completely happy at all. And isn't that what this is about? To be in the moment and to enjoy where we're at in our life right now, not to be striving for something in the future, but be happy in the present. And so I read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle 10 years ago. That was before all of this went down, but that really taught me how to really start living in the present. And then you talked about, you used the word, manifesting, that you're really good at manifesting all different kinds of things, but not money. Manifestation has come into me throughout my life, and I just kind of ignored it. In 2016, I had one of the best years of my life. It had been 4 years since my divorce. I sold my house. My kids were grown, and I took a 5-month trip across Europe, just a hiatus. And I had a rule: I would never pick a country I was going to go to more than 1 week in advance. If I got to a city and I loved it, I would stay a few days. If I liked it, I'd stay a few more days, and then I'd pick my next city and go. It was an amazing trip. After 5 months, I come back to America. I'm sitting in my office one night, and everybody had gone home. It's like 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. And I'm sitting in my chair and I'm thinking, wow, it's August. This has been the most amazing year of my life. I just gotten back from Europe. The company's doing well. We thought the buyout was going to happen in the next couple of months, and I was going to get this big multi-million-dollar payout and all these things. And I thought, what else would I like to do this year? And I thought, you know what? I've always wanted to go to Burning Man. So I think it's coming up. And I opened up my laptop and I Googled it. And I thought, and this was a Thursday or Friday. Burning Man was the following weekend. So it was like 9 days away. So I immediately, checked tickets, of course. Tickets sell out in February or March for Burning Man. So I called a buddy of mine who had gone 5 or 6 times to Burning Man, and to see if he had any connections. He's like, dude, you got to call me in February or March. If you want to go to Burning Man, you're not going to be able to get tickets. But there's a Burning Man creed that if you put it out to the universe that you want to go to Burning Man, the universe will have you at Burning Man next weekend. And, and I'm a kind of a, what the hell? That's bullshit. I don't buy into this, crap. And, but I hung up the phone and I thought, what the heck? Let's give it a try. This has been an amazing year. I sat back in my chair. I closed my eyes. I visualized myself at Burning Man. I visualized myself riding my bike on the playa, going to some of the art exhibits. I visualized myself dancing to music. I saw myself there. And I was telling myself, I'm so excited to be at Burning Man next weekend. Thank you, universe, for sending me to Burning Man next weekend. I closed my laptop, but I spent at least 3 or 4 minutes just thinking, just kind of basically meditating. And keep in mind, I wasn't meditating at this point. I'd maybe meditated 10 times in my life before that, or 20 times in my life. But I thank the universe for an amazing year. My Europe trip was incredible. Everything was going well in my life. The company was doing well. And I was coming from a place of gratitude. So I finished just 10 minutes, threw my laptop in my bag, luck up, I'm driving home. On the way home, there's a Guitar Center on the way home that I would pop in every now and then. I told you I'm still a musician. It's always in your blood. So there was a new keyboard out that I wanted to go check it out. I thought, I'm going to pop in Guitar Center. I'm going to play this keyboard that I'm, dreaming about. So I pop in, I'm sitting there playing the keyboard, and all of a sudden my phone lights up. I look at my phone, and it's a friend, Steve, who's really more of an acquaintance. He's a good friend of my brother, who I'd met multiple times at barbecues at my brother's house. And so I knew him for a few years, but not a very close friend, didn't know him all that well. And I answered the phone. He's like, hey, Steve, how's it going? Pat tells me, my brother, Pat tells me, you've been in Europe. How was your trip? I said, oh, it was awesome, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, hey, the reason why I called, I don't suppose you have any desire to go to Burning Man, do you? Oh. Matt, this was 20 minutes later, literally 20 freaking minutes later. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. And then I immediately, though, the doubt crept in. Wait a minute. Did you just get a phone call from my other buddy that he goes, no, I don't even know. They don't know each other. So it wasn't that. And I said, what made you call me? I hadn't talked to him in at least a year, maybe a couple of years, that I hadn't even seen him. And I said, what made you call me? And he goes, well, I was sitting here talking to my wife, Yuki. His wife is Japanese, and a friend that I was supposed to go to Burning Man with backed out. He can't go. Something came up. And so I was telling her, I don't know. I don't want to go by myself. What am I going to do? And I've called around. I can't find anybody to go. And she said, what about Pat's friend, Steve? He's a musician. He's kind of artsy. And, he'd probably go call him. And I said, when was that? And he goes, oh, about 20 minutes ago. So while I was sitting in my office, meditating, manifesting, going into Burning Man, she was saying to him at that moment, pretty much we did the timeline. You should call Steve and see if he wants to go to Burning Man. And the reason why I bring up this story is you would think that I would have learned from that experience and said, all right, wow, if I can manifest Burning Man tickets in 20 minutes, let's start doing this manifesting thing and start projecting to the universe and co-create with the universe on a regular basis. No, I just thought, wow, that's a cool story that happened. And I told it to a lot of people over the last 5-6 years since it happened. But not once after that did I, start using manifestation in my life. And so when I've, gone through a couple other rough patches over the last few years, including this thing with my business partner, because that hadn't happened yet at this point. I just kind of went in this tailspin and wasn't sleeping and, was kind of F the universe. Why is this shit always happening to me? I was kind of in the victim stage, and that was a big part of it. I realized that I was being a victim. I was the poor guy that his business partner left. And I realized that became kind of part of my identity. I'm the guy who his partner screwed. And so only in the last year is I read Gabrielle Bernstein's book, Super Attractor. Highly recommend it because you brought up manifesting and you said that's money's the one thing that you haven't been able to manifest. She goes into a deep dive on why sometimes certain areas of our lives, why it doesn't work. Because of, things that are going on in our mind. And I think reason why the Burning Man thing happened is I was coming from such a place of gratitude. And I completely believed for that 5-minute period that I believed it with all my being. I'm going to go to Burning Man. Even if I don't have tickets, I'm just going to show up there. I'll figure out a way to get in there. So I'd already predetermined and believed it. I think that's part of why that manifestation happened.
I think that's a great, first of all, it is a hair on the back of your neck standing up story. So,
wow.
And I've had similar type kismet kind of moments where you're like, wow, I just thought about that, or almost like a deja vu kind of thing. I've had those. I've had, and when I talked about, and while you were talking, I'm thinking about, my inability to manifest money. And then I actually thought about it from a different angle. And that's my brain works in that way. When someone challenges something that I say, I think about, well, okay, how could that be different? And, money.
Oh, it can totally be different. No,
money is and then I'll give you
I have areas of my life that I can't manifest either. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
So I'll give you 2 examples. Number one, I've had a dream since I was young that I die at the age of 53. I've had over and over and over again. Now, wow. I never die in the dream, but in the dream, I'm dead and I'm 53. I don't know how I die. I don't know any of those things. And I was talking with a good buddy of mine who's a real spiritual guy, very much a universe energy kind of thinker, and has really helped me sort of have a lot of different perspective and, understanding the 5D awakening and all these different things that are going on. And now, thanks to COVID and the pandemic, that have sort of created space for these kind of conversations.
Totally.
And he says, maybe you're looking at it wrong. I said, what do you mean? He said, maybe death isn't dying. Death is a change. He goes, maybe that's the death of your old life and the beginning of a rebirth. And I went, well, fuck.
I totally see that.
Way better of an outcome than what I was thinking about, right?
Yeah.
So that's number one. And number two, I'm retiring in 16 months and I'll be 52. And I bought 30 acres out in Western Missouri. And that's where I'm retiring to, where my best friend lives. And maybe money manifestation actually happened because I wouldn't have had the ability to write a check for $120,000. But the market allowed for my house to have more equity than it ever had before,
Oh, absolutely.
and allowed me to then take that equity out of my house and pay cash for that land, which is manifesting money in a sense that I couldn't buy that land without that money. So there's always, and my brain has to work through logic. I have to, but it usually comes from someone else's viewpoint on something that allows me to sort of see it come at it from a different angle. So thank you for that. Fascinating story, dude. Fascinating, just everything. Your viewpoints on things, your perspective, your appreciation for the struggles that you've gone through, the learning lessons from them. Everything is a teachable moment and should be part of your growth as a man and as a human, into the person that God has created you to be. Some people get there earlier, some people get there later. But ultimately, I believe, I have two mottos that I live by. You are where you are when you're supposed to be there. And number two, is this the most important thing I should be doing right now? And I try to, the last few years, really focus in on those things. COVID shut down my gym businesses for good. And, I knew that the way the government works and the way that this was probably going to play out, that this was going to be a long-term thing, and that it was going to be we were in a more personalized neurological, neuromuscular rehab and on top of athletic training. So it was very hands-on. And I knew that was going to be, in this state that I live in, very similar to California as far as the restrictions and lockdowns, was going to be a difficult thing to recover from. So we still have our manufacturing side, but that's also been delayed because our clients are professional sports teams and college sports teams, and they're not buying and they're not allowing anybody in. So it's this whole circle of events, but
changed everything. Yeah.
But what it's done, it's allowed me to see forward past business. It's allowed me to see that I'm ready to transition my life from being a public servant to being a problem solver to being from being a person who is constantly on to someone who can live in a new mindset, which is retirement, which is living off my land, which is creating my own ecosystem within the 30 acres that I bought, which is living next door to my best friend because we promised we would do that 32 years ago.
That is so cool, by the way. That story of you moving back to your best friend. I grew up in Illinois, by the way. So that's,
You're in Midwest.
Right on the St. Louis, right on the Illinois-Missouri border. So I grew up 20 minutes from downtown St. Louis, Missouri. Yeah.
So it's for me, and I'm an East Coast kid, right? I'm a city kid. So I'm going straight redneck, and I know nothing about it. And he is.
No, so that's interesting. Is he's already there in the Midwest?
Yep, that's where he's from. Yep.
Okay. Gotcha.
So,
gotcha.
And he was in Colorado. He was a cop out there for years, and then moved back to where he's from, which is Nevada, Missouri, which is far west, 15 miles from Kansas. Gotcha. So anyways, long story short, we'd always said we're going to retire, buy land, build houses next to each other. So he moves back to Nevada, which is not it's just a cow town, right? There's nothing attractive about it. There's no Rocky Mountains to look out your window at. It's just flat pastures out there. So he kept saying, I want you to move out here and move out. I'm like, there's no way I can get my wife to agree to leave, the East Coast to middle of nowhere, Missouri. It's just, It's not going to happen. Then 2020 hits and politics and everything sort of just takes over your life. And she's like, I can't be in this environment. So we've been going out to Missouri, and she's like, I'm thinking Missouri might be a good place for us to go. I'm like, what? So long story short, I buy this land and I text my best friend and I say, your move, motherfucker.
That's awesome.
And he's like, what? I said, I bought the land. He goes, what? I'm like, 32 years ago, we agreed that we were going to build houses next to each other. I said, so I don't know what you got to do, but you need to sell the house you're in and start building on that land.
That's hilarious.
Like, I don't want to do that. I'm like, listen, I manifested this shit. I'm moving across the goddamn country. Your ass is building a house. So
whether you like it or not, you're coming.
Next month he starts building. So,
wow, what a great story.
So I think there's first of all, I'm thankful that we connected. I always like to give a shout out to Podmatch and Alex Sanfilippo, who has created that website, was on my show.
Yeah,
great guy. Before he even came up with Podmatch, I had him on the show. And so I'm really thankful that he created that network of
I would agree. I've met some amazing human beings, and it's just a great platform. And what you're doing here, Matt, with 2 Dates and a Dash is just, I love the concept. I love the idea. And it's so interesting as you're talking about, how COVID changed our lives. And you're talking about, I don't know about you, but I probably wouldn't have this podcast were it not for my podcast. So did COVID play a role in you launching this podcast?
I did this in 2018.
Oh, so you're a veteran. You've been around. Gotcha.
But it's a hobby, so it's not. I don't do it as nearly as frequently as you do it. I was for a while doing 1 or 2 a week, and then it became a job, and then it became less fun. So now I only talk to people I want to talk to now. That's my new rule.
That's cool.
So it's, for me, it's, I've had super famous people on. I've had women who've lost their children to opioid overdoses. I've had everybody in between. And for me, this ability to connect with somebody that I otherwise wouldn't meet or know, and then share that person's, dash with the world is really what this is about for me. So
it's a really cool. By the way, I love the episode. I listened to the one with the creator of Entourage.
Doug.
Yeah, really cool. So you had some amazing guests on, but what I love about the format, like you said, is we connect with people that we otherwise wouldn't, but what also is different is, unlike if I were to meet you at a backyard barbecue where everybody's out, would probably converse for 2, 3, 4 minutes, then we're interrupted, somebody else's, but the conversations you can have just one-on-one for an hour plus, like we've had, you can have so much more meaningful conversations than we otherwise would have. And so just awesome. Just want to thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been awesome.
I appreciate it. Well, hang tight. We're going to talk off air. Everybody, thank you for being a part of this episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. Thank you for staying with us, listening to Steve and his story. Steve, what's the website where people can find you at?
betterplaceproject.org. Thanks.
And go there, subscribe to his podcast, be a listener, be someone who can engage with him and his guests, and really deep dive into what he's doing and trying to just bring some joy and some authenticity to the world, which clearly, if we've all been alive for the last 2 years, we fucking need. If you want to learn more about me, go to mattcubbler.com, go to Matt Cubbler on YouTube. And if you want to get A Brother's Love and Memoir, you can do that there as well, or on Amazon or wherever else you find books. So I think that wraps it up. Steve, thank you. You're the man.
Thank you so much. This you mentioned a minute ago that are you doing what you should be doing? There's no place I'd rather would have been than having this conversation with you this last hour. It added to my dash. So thanks again, Matt. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you, brother. Everybody, God bless, and go out and be kind to one another.
Two boys in the sandbox, like brothers we became. From matchbox cars to playground scars.